What's happening, guys? Another episode of Read and Reflect here, and today we are returning to Nietzsche and we're looking at the gay science. And I picked a couple of passages kind of by whim, but also not without intent. I guess what I'm trying to say is I didn't look so hard for the optimal passages, which with Nietzsche is a very hard thing to determine which aren't the optimal passages because, in a sense, everything he says communicates roughly the same thing, but they're also specific, each aphorism, each passage in its own way. But I just picked a couple from book one that, you know, he gets a bad rap, and he was granted a very strange guy. He was a hermit, and nobody necessarily was good enough for him. I mean, from what I can tell, he had friends, and he was even a very nice person to the people he related with. But he isolated himself because he had this unconquerable conviction that man, in general, had underestimated himself so greatly and scorned at anybody who tried to cultivate their higher capacities. And he saw it as his duty, essentially, to awaken people to their capacities, which many of us never knew of and really can't know of. It's really practice is what it comes down to. But I'm going to get to these couple of passages. And to know Nietzsche, you have to know that he was a very aristocratic fellow. And by that I mean he is interested in select and ordinary, authentic people who do not succumb to the group conscience of lowly, or he would say common people that are just settled for, mundane pleasures and not going beyond themselves in any way. Not, in Nietzschean terms, wielding their instincts and applying their intelligence. And something, I guess that's what I was saying before, is that everything kind of, in a way, says one and the same thing, is that there is this instinctual intelligence that we all have. We identify with our conscious minds. That's who we believe we are, and we believe that is the depth and breadth of us. But what you get from reading him is that, we are the result of millions of years of evolution. Our story did not begin with us, me, per se. I am the culmination, you are the culmination, all of us who are in this life, we have this backstory that came from before us, and we're just a continuance in this chain. And so, what has to be drawn from that is that there is so much more in us than we could possibly know. And when you awaken to that, you kind of start to trust whatever that is, because if we've been evolving for millions of years, obviously it's intelligent enough, whatever that is, nature, whatever selects, it's intelligent enough to have evolved for millions of years. And that's pretty amazing. So I'm going to get into this. This one's called Noble and Common. It's the third passage from the first book. Common natures consider all noble, magnanimous feelings inexpedient and therefore, first of all, incredible. They blink when they hear of such things and seem to feel like saying, "Surely, there must be some advantage involved. One cannot see through everything." They are suspicious of the noble person, as if he surreptitiously sought his advantage. When they are irresistibly persuaded of the absence of selfish intentions and gains, they see the noble person as a kind of fool. They despise him in his joy and laugh at his shining eyes. How can one enjoy being at a disadvantage? How could one desire with one's eyes open to be disadvantaged? Some disease of reason must be associated with the noble affection. Thus they think and sneer, as they sneer at the pleasure that a madman derives from his fixed idea. Okay, so that's a distinguishing feature, I would say, of the aristocratic soul, per se. The person who is, he would call the Übermensch, the higher man. The madman derives a pleasure from a fixed idea, and you could definitely say that he was such a person. He had a fixed idea that maybe we can't even hone in on with words, but he had this elevated feeling inside him that he just trusted it. Call it instinct or drive or something beyond that even, but that's a distinguishing feature, is that those men who stand out, they are driven by something, and they themselves can't even explain what it is, but they will not let that go in order to conform. What distinguishes the common type is that it never loses sight of its advantage, and that this thought of purpose and advantage is even stronger than the strongest instincts. Not to allow these instincts to lead one astray to perform inexpedient acts. That is their wisdom and pride. Compared to them, the higher type is more unreasonable. Those who are noble, magnanimous, and self-sacrificial do succumb to their instincts, and when they are at their best, their reason pauses. Okay, so there you go again. Expedience, advantage, reason, linearity, thinking of yourself in terms of how do I conform with the thought that people already have of me. You're just in this kind of safe little circle. I don't want to surprise anybody. I want to please them so they will please me. I want to understand how they think so I can think like them, and we get into this kind of circle where we're just kind of getting each other off. And I don't mean that in any perverted sense, but if you think about it, it is kind of perverted by itself. An animal that protects its young at the risk of its life, or that during the mating period follows the female even into death, does not think of danger and death. Its reason also pauses, because the pleasure in its young or in the female and the fear of being deprived of this pleasure dominate it totally. The animal becomes more stupid than usual, just like those who are noble and magnanimous. Stupidity, though, I swear this is the secret, or at least one of them. But I would say that's when I came to that realization that stupidity is really, it's kind of the highest intelligence that I can think of. What's that saying? Simplicity is the greatest form of complexity, or something like that. But, okay, I always draw back to my writing habit, because that's the most readily available way I can communicate this, is that when I first began writing, I was always trying to write in a reasonable manner. I was trying to think out everything intellectually so much without really just trusting whatever that first voice, that realist voice is in me to speak. I was just kind of strangling it. And when you do that, I mean, it just kind of makes you write garbage. It makes you write robotically, and there's no authenticity, there's no appeal to it. And I swear, I think many of us have talents, and the more I read, the more that will be made apparent that we have talents that we just don't trust ourselves to unfold because we're trapped in this. We feel like it's this kind of perfectionism, but it's also this kind of catering to, I want other people to think of me in such a way. They have some feelings of pleasure and displeasure that are so strong that they reduce the intellect to silence or to servitude. At that point their heart displaces the head, and one speaks of passion. Now and then we also encounter the opposite and, as it were, the reversal of passion. For example, somebody once laid his hand on Fontenelle's heart, saying to him, "What you have there, dear sir, is another brain." The unreason or counter-reason of passion is what the common type despises in the noble, especially when this passion is directed toward objects whose value seems quite fantastic and arbitrary. One is annoyed with those who succumb to the passions of the belly, but at least one comprehends the attraction that plays the tyrant in such cases. But one cannot comprehend how anyone could risk his health and honor for the sake of a passion for knowledge. The taste of the higher type is for exceptions, for things that leave most people cold and seem to lack sweetness. The higher type has a singular value standard. Moreover, it usually believes that the idiosyncrasy of its taste is not a singular value standard. Rather, it posits its values and disvalues as generally valid and thus becomes incomprehensible and impractical. Very rarely does a higher nature retain sufficient reason for understanding and treating everyday people as such. For the most part, this type assumes that its own passion is present but kept concealed in all men, and this belief even becomes an ardent and eloquent faith. Okay, I'm guilty of this too, because my own experience, it's... Okay, so there are people who just tend to spend most of their time with other people, and when you do that frequently enough and religiously enough, you tend to naturally mimic those people. You behave in a very like manner. But this noble type that Nietzsche's talking about, that is overcome by a fixed idea, a high feeling, that he said one of his other things is, it's not the intensity of high feeling, but the duration that is the sign of a higher type, or what, it was something like that. But some people just don't have that. They don't have this sensation of the grandness of our nature, how much we can conceive, how much we can give form to with whatever our means. And people without that sensation, those who do have it, look on those without it and just have this kind of natural scorn. It's this shorting of existence. The quote-unquote noble type looks at the quote-unquote common type and just has this kind of just disappointment. And that's Nietzsche in a nutshell. It's this disappointment. I mean, he goes after Christianity, but more than that, it's the humility and the servitude that fostered in people. That's what he was really after, even absent of Christianity. But when such exceptional people do not see themselves as the exception, how can they ever understand the common type and arrive at a fair evaluation of the rule? Thus they, too, speak of the folly, inexpediency, and fantasies of humanity, stunned that the course of the world should be so insane, and puzzled that it won't own up to what is needful. This is the eternal injustice of those who are noble. So yeah, eternal injustice is this kind of, it is a bit of a bitterness. And if you're somebody who kind of looks at the masses, or just people, whatever term you want to use, and you just have this kind of frustration, you have to keep that in check, because I think Nietzsche was kind of such a person who let that get out of hand. He could not even, like I said before, he had a few friends, and there are letters that you can find, but he was definitely full-fledged hermit and a loner. And that's one thing, a big thing that his critics get him on, is that he just kind of, he couldn't make any friends, so he had to write about how shallow and boorish humanity has been hitherto, and that we need more exciting, more aristocratic, distinguished men to come and save the day, which I respect that, and I try to live up to it. Alright, this one is passage number 8, also book 1. It's called Unconscious Virtues. The thing that got me about that title, I'm trying to remember the German. I just looked up what the German was for unconscious. It was Das Unbewussten. I can't remember what exactly it was. But I wonder where that term came from, because it's accredited to the psychoanalysts, but he came before the psychoanalysts, and they were very influenced by him, so it could be that he was the first to speak of the unconscious. And that's what he's speaking of in so much of this, is that you have consciousness, and then you have this deep ocean, this deep network that is the unconscious, and it holds so much potential that can be actualized by the quote-unquote noble man. All the human qualities of which we are conscious, and especially those whose visibility and obviousness for others, too, we take for granted, are subject altogether to altogether different laws of development than are those qualities which we know either badly or not at all, and which also conceal themselves by means of their subtlety even from the very subtle observers, knowing how to hide, as it were, behind nothing at all. This is the thing, it's almost an article of faith, is that you have to have this kind of, this austere knowing that you are, it's as if you are a continent and you think you're a state. You're looking at yourself in this very constricted manner. But, and I try to tell people, is it all comes down to expression. You have to find your means of expression to awaken those higher faculties that you can't even know cognitively. You can't even put them into words. But they are so strong, and once you come to realize their existence, they can take hold of you, and they, much of the time, know better than you. A lot of the time I write, it does not feel like me writing. My consciousness is, there's some kind of voice that I hear vaguely, that I tap into, and then I just kind of go with it. And there's a little bit, it's like a conversation. I hear the voice, and then I try to assess the rhythm and the fluidity of what it's telling me. I try to assess the word placement and the choice of what words. It's this conversation, and what that is it's these parts of myself that I never knew about for most of my life. I only came to realize these things probably in the last year. But once you know that, it's so profound. You've discovered, it's as if you went over the ocean and found new land, just like those people did, like Columbus say. You just found a whole nother part of yourself. And that goes on, it seems. I don't think anybody could ever exhaust that. It is similar with the subtle sculptures on the scales of reptiles. It would be wrong to take them for ornaments or weapons, for they become visible only under a microscope, under an artificially sharpened eye that similar animals, for which these little sculptures might signify ornaments or weapons, simply lack. It's this not being able to see. There is no tangible way of knowing this, but it is this kind of faith. It's knowing that you are the product of that evolution, and that you are an amalgamation of so many living things, call them instincts or whatever. And most people either just bury them down and leave them dormant, or call them evil. And I think that's another very big part of his philosophy, is that people call these instincts evil and strange. And well, yes, they are strange, and even to a degree evil, yeah. But if you are just burying that and trying to be a good person who just conceals himself, because I firmly believe that you're being a total lie if you are the goody two-shoes who just has this darker side that internally you know so well, but you never give expression to it, you never assert yourself. You need to find a way to integrate those crazed feelings. They are crazed feelings. All of us have that, and we like to think that only people in the insane asylums are insane. But we all have our own kind of personal, specific insanities. And I would say that's why a lot of aristocratic, creative people are driven to their task, because without that, they just go crazy. It orients them. It makes them... I wrote this somewhere. What did I say? It's in the face of anxiety. If you have this mission that you're carrying out, you know your worth. It doesn't take you down anymore, because you know that you are applying yourself to the fullest degree that you possibly can. Our visible moral qualities, and especially those we believe to be visible, follow their own course, and the invisible ones that have the same names but are in relation to other men, neither ornaments nor weapons, also follow their own course. Probably a wholly different course, and they probably have lines, subtleties, and sculptures that might give pleasure to a god with a divine microscope. Because he's atheistic, but he does, in Birth of Tragedy and his other works, kind of sneak in these deistic precepts. He has his own a priori say for how much he liked to take them down. But he would say, were much better a prioris. They were more conducive to the elevation of man beyond the level of a mere ant amongst ants. It made him a dragon. It made him a kind of monster, but I've wondered this myself, and I'm not accusing Nietzsche of anything, but he is so intelligent, I thought one day, that he's the kind of guy who could get away with murder if he wanted to. And I don't think he murdered anybody. But he had this ferocity, and he was very harsh towards people in his words. But from what I've read from Walter Kaufman's commentaries, he was a very nice, relaxed guy in the company of other people. He said something like, I've always felt a sense of duty. Like I've always felt I've had something to do for people. I can't remember exactly how he put it, but he was per se a dragon for the good, for how much he criticizes the concept of good. He never, at least from what we know, and from, again, I don't believe he did anything malicious, particularly to anybody in his life, but he was a dragon for the good. He had this willingness to assertion, to hyper assertion. He was not holding back anything that he felt needed to be said. And I think that's something we can all learn from, because I personally spent many years just not assertive enough at all. I didn't trust my instincts, which is another kind of maxim that people analogize with Nietzsche. But it's true that we do, to a great degree, have to trust our instincts, or else they rule us. Thus we have, for example, our industry, our ambition, our cuteness. All the world knows about that. But in addition to all that, we probably also have our industry, our ambition, our acuteness. But for these reptile scales, no microscope has been invented as yet. Yes, and it's hard to communicate or convey Nietzsche through speech. It's almost, when I read him, independent of my own voice, but from my inner voice, it's such eloquence. His use of italics, he knows where to play, he knows which words to emphasize. And when he's saying our industry, our ambition, our acuteness, he's talking about these distinguishing factors, is that everybody, though we're all comprised of this insanely sophisticated nature, there's a kind of truth or reality that exists that is particular to us. And say, if you trust in these kind of reptile scales, is the way he puts it, that we can't even see. Nobody can see. Only the God with the divine microscope can even get a glimpse of them. Yeah, that is what makes us distinct. That is what makes us magnanimous. That's really, I mean, if any of you, as I do, have the desire to not settle for a lowly life, but to stand out, and to stand out with pride of what is yours, then you gotta know these kinds of things, even though they're practically unknowable. At this point, the friends of instinctive morality will say, "Bravo! At least he considers unconscious virtues possible, and that suffices us." Oh, you are satisfied with so little. It's so funny, because that is what all of this comes down to, is that he is the man of instinctive morality, and all preceding moralities were contra-instinctive. And we like to think that any morality that is not contra-instinctual will lead to a world of madness. We'll all be at each other's throats. We need to be tamed by these kinds of consoling ideas. But it's basically unanswerable. We can't say whether without Christianity. I mean, from what I've read of historians like Francois Guizot, it seems that Christianity definitely had a very fundamental role in our civilization, that we would not be as humane without it. I mean, that's the Germanic barbarians that infiltrated Rome after its collapse. They were very individualistic. They were not willing to Okay, so this is a very interesting thing because those Germanic barbarians, they are the seed of the individualism that marks Western culture. Is that they had this kind of crudity about them. They did not want to succumb to any rule, any singular rule, and that brought philosophical pluralism. We all wanted to have our own ideas, but at the time it was very crude and it was unartistic. It was not a fruitful kind of individualism because it was in its infancy. But through the years, it grew and grew, and we became more, Guizot says, godly, more godlike. We started to have higher conceptual capabilities. And yeah, so to that extent, Christianity definitely played a fundamental role in our civilization. But we can't answer that without it we wouldn't have done better or worse or what, or if it would have, it definitely would not have been the same, because faith is a very, very powerful thing. And even Nietzsche, who is against the religious faiths, had his own kind of religious faith, and I'm somebody of the same stature. And it's hard because if you have your own faith, you can't confirm by anybody else the validity of it. You have to rely on yourself, which is lonely. It's scary. You don't know if what you're pursuing is right. And that's the consolation of kind of theological faiths. But yeah, I hope what you guys got from this is that we are so rich and overabundant, our nature, and that if you have the desire to become distinct, you want to become yourself, become what you are. That's the name of one of his Ecce Homo chapters. Then you have to incorporate the fullness of both intellect and instinct and checking those things, but you need to have a good circulation between all of them. And that's the kind of Taoist way. You're riding that line between chaos and order, very Jordan Peterson terms. But yeah, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you guys enjoyed this and that you tune in for more. And I'll be seeing you at the next episode. See you guys.